Hey, everybody. I'm Joe McGovern, awards reporter here at TheWrap, and we are very happy to have you here for our 2024 awards screening of Americans with No Address with director-producer Julia Verdon, narrator and actor William Baldwin, and actor Xander Berkeley. We're going to show you the trailer for the movie now, and then we're going to go right into a conversation with our guests. And to our audience, please take part in the live chat during the stream. Share your thoughts about the film and let us know where you're tuning in from. So now let's take a look at the trailer for Americans with No Address.
40% of the people who are homeless, who are older than 50 years old, became homeless after they were 50. That's an American tragedy that's growing.
If you're in the public school system, you deal with children who are experiencing homelessness every day.
This is an intentional policy decision that forced people into this community.
They had 10 city trucks, a dozen officers, and then as soon as they saw we were there filming, they stopped.
Our city made a mistaken decision to sue the lead charity who were caring for the homeless because they were feeding too many people on Sundays.
And that was where I started just questioning, like, wait, my tax dollars paid for these programs where county vehicles were going into the school grounds, handing out clean needles, sharp containers.
So many politicians talk about how much more money is being spent.
$400,000.
$250,000.
$700 million.
And the money?
We're spending 3 times more than we were 12 years ago. Yet, it's skyrocketing.
It is the worst drug that has ever been known to man.
The psychosis had been so bad to where I didn't remember how many times I had gone into that store to do that exact same thing. Well, the owner of the store came running after me and he shot at me.
Homelessness feels one way when you're just talking about an issue, and then it feels totally different when you say, that's my friend. What in the world happened?
How can you walk by a homeless person and don't feel nothing? You're dead. You're just living, but you don't know much.
It amazed me that this was a place where, people's lives were changing.
Anything can happen. ODing, people dying left and right, tents catching fire.
All of those things are coming to a neighborhood near you if this policy wins out.
Welcome back. It is my pleasure to welcome director Julia Verdon, William Baldwin, and Xander Berkeley. Thank you, the three of you, so much for joining us for this conversation about this pretty incredible film.
Thank you for having us. Yeah.
It's a movie that in which I was just filled with so many thoughts while watching it, so many conflicting thoughts, because at one point I think maybe we have it all figured out, and then in the next scene we realize that no, it's even more complicated than any of us probably have fully comprehended. But Julie, in a way, you have. Curious to ask about the origins of this project. I know that you had a short film. Was it called Lost Girls?
Thank you for asking, Joe, and thank you for having us here on TheWrap and shining the light on this issue. I come from a social impact film background. I'm very passionate about using film to raise awareness on key social issues. I previously made films on teen trafficking, domestic abuse, bullying, social media predators. And during the pandemic, I just saw this rise on homelessness everywhere I went. And in particular, seeing young kids on the streets and older people. And there was one day when I was coming out of my yoga class and I walked past and there was a man with no shoes just sitting there kind of huddled up with his dog, and it was teeming down with rain, and just the haunted look on his face. I couldn't get it out of my head. And I gave him a bit of money at the time, and then I went back with some shoes and socks and everything, and he'd gone. And I just thought that image stayed with me, and I just thought, I got to do something about this. So I started going out and talking to various people on the streets, listening to stories. I do a lot of volunteer work with foster youth, and I heard their stories about how many of them had ended up on the streets. And so I sat down and I wrote a script. So the origin was the script for a feature. And I'd met Robert Craig because he'd been involved with my previous film that I wrote and directed called Maya, and was one of my supporters on that. And I told him that I had a new project with a storyline around the homeless crisis, and he wanted to read it. And he and his wife are very passionate about the issue. And so we started with the film. They brought on a homeless expert to vet the script, Dr. Robert Marbut, and we also had input from Philip Mangiano too. And Robert Marbut came on board as an executive producer. And then with many of my other films, what I've done, I've made a narrative feature and then also made a short educational piece to go with them. And so that was what I'd originally pitched to Robert with Americans with No Address, as a short educational piece to go with the film. But then when we started on it and Robert Marbut got involved and Robert Craig got really excited about it, we just realized this could be so much bigger. And it became a full-on feature documentary. And then the journey started, and we went around 20 different states on a bus, and interviewed a broad spectrum of people, from people living on the streets to people working with people experiencing homelessness, government officials. We even interviewed Joe Biden's right-hand man, and just got piece, people working in hospitals, locals affected by it, as many different people as we could. And our goal with the film is to really share our learnings with the audience, because I learned more than I ever thought I would. And when I embarked on this project, I knew a little bit about it, but I had no idea of the complexity of this problem. And do I know all the answers? No, but I certainly have a lot more information, and I hope that what we learned will be helpful to others.
Yeah, I think it will be. Thank you for all that. I was curious to ask, because about the film, the narrative film that is coming up, but that's a part of, and we see a couple of scenes. And William, you're in that. Can you tell us about your involvement, maybe first in that project, in No Address, and then how it turned into your coming on board here as the narrator of this film?
Yeah, I was invited to be a part of the film very late. I was offered the film, and I had to get on a plane in like I had to start shooting in 2 or 3 days. So usually you are offered a lead in an ensemble film weeks or maybe even months in advance. But I'm not sure what was going on with the casting, but I jumped in late, and I was up in Sacramento and had a very, very a wonderful experience with Julia and Xander and Robert Craig Films, and all of our mutual friend, Dr. Robert Marbut, who's a homelessness czar for multiple administrations, and we all learned a lot from him. And they did this tremendous research going to 20 cities in 18 states, which resulted in this documentary to coincide with the feature film. And I had been involved in this area, for many years in the latter 80s and in the early 90s. But when I got married and I became a father and I moved to California from New York, I lost touch with a lot of my contacts in Albany, New York City, and Washington. But I had done work with an organization called Help for the Homeless. And I also did, in fact, I was on their board briefly, and I did some homelessness work with Andrew Cuomo when he was the housing secretary under President Clinton. And this is something that's, everything's changed. Everything has changed with COVID, and everything has changed with fentanyl. We now have, 1.5 million adults homeless. We have over 1.5 million homeless children. They're doing remarkable work right now in this country in various pockets in Fort Smith, Arkansas, in Pinellas County, Florida, in San Antonio, in Austin, in a partnership between some nonprofits and Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, some veterans programs in New York. They're really, really doing important work. What people have to get hip to and accepting of is that the only way we're going to resolve this is looking at it more as a mental health crisis rather than a homelessness crisis. And we have a huge mental health crisis, which leads to homelessness, and we need comprehensive wraparound 360 care for these people. They need mental health care coverage. They need addiction treatment. They need education. They need vocational training. They need job placement. They need housing. It's long-term care, but I've seen them they're getting people back on their feet and to a life of independence. The program that Dr. Marbert works with, 2,700 people in San Antonio, they have a success rate of, I'm almost embarrassed to say how high it is because it doesn't seem like it's even possible, but their success rate of getting people back on their feet and on the road to independence is at 70% in this program. You have to remember, some people, you and I are walking down the street, you and I can clearly tell when you're dealing with a person who's so mentally ill that they're going to require lifelong care. But many of them don't. And these programs right now are helping people get back on their feet, helping them get on a road to independence. And they're having a very high success rate. And we just have to roll this out to have this working in in thousands of more counties and hundreds of more cities.
Yeah, yeah. And, thank you for all that. And there's a few points I want to get to a little later about how involved you actually are and have been for a long time in this issue, as you just alluded to and mentioned. But I wanted to ask Xander first to talk about your involvement in the feature film as an actor and why it was so important to be a part of this. I think that it's easy to bury our head and try not to see it or think about it. But tell us about getting involved and why it meant so much.
Well, it's interesting. Just each time you hear, like when Julie was talking about the genesis of the project and that man that she saw, I think we all have experiences. She followed through on it and did something about it. And Billy's done a lot of work over the years as well. I've chipped away at it in my way. I lived in Hollywood for a very long time, and I first started coming to Los Angeles from New York around 1980, when there was a sudden and very palpable shift from when the right and the left joined forces when Reagan got elected to provide the left wanting to provide individual freedoms for people that have been institutionalized. And we all sort of cite One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest popularity in sort of bringing that very legitimate concern to light. But the momentum of that with the conservative wish to cut unnecessary spending wherever possible joined forces in a rather unfortunate way ultimately, and all of these people were dumped onto the streets, and it was like overnight, just a sea of people. If you were going from New York to Los Angeles and back and forth, and then all of a sudden, ba-boom, what just happened? And you find out it's this confluence of political forces that were at play in an unfortunate way. And I think we now need to just really put our heads together and pray or wish or visualize or get involved, even more importantly, to bring the two divergent sides together, to work together to find a solution. Obviously, a lot of people got dropped on the streets from back then without proper medical care for their mental health problems and started self-medicating. And I wrote a script as far back as, like, I think 85. It was based on an idea of two sort of undercover journalists, two guys. I wrote it with a friend that went underground as homeless and got swept up into the system. And I educated myself a bit at that point and didn't follow through because I kept getting those pesky acting jobs. and that legitimately distracted me from developing that further. I was relegated to, on an individual level, as a sort of socially concerned citizen, and as an actor, always doing research. I didn't want to just give people money that we thought inevitably would be spent on drugs or alcohol, because that doesn't feel like it's helping anything. But whenever I had a chance to get some food, instead of that, if I felt I passed somebody and said no, or just ignored them, which always is such I think a jarring experience, I think, for each of us on a conscience level. Like, well, what did I just do? I just pretended they didn't exist. And so to assuage my guilt or conscience, I would go as often as I could and get some food the next place, and wander back and or find someone in that general area that looked like they were hungry, wanted food, and in whatever cases I could, people that looked like they needed someone to just pay a little attention and see them. And so I feel like I spent my life working on that level. Like, you know, it's like, feels like spoonfuls to unload an ocean of suffering. But I have two daughters, and we left Los Angeles, Hollywood, about 6.5 years ago. And in no small part, it was a lot of different things that felt like the traffic and the tourists up the Hollywood Hills, and any number of other things. But it's also just this ever expanding sea of homelessness that was oppressive and frightening if you had kids sometimes walking through. And you just, I remember just being sort of exactly what Julie said. I kept wanting to go out with my phone and just do interviews on the street and see if I could turn that into something that could be watched or put together, if all of us went out there and just had conversations with as many people as possible and see what happened? Where did things start to go wrong? But whenever you're relegated to the individual level, you feel like the numbers that Billy was just mentioning are so beyond anything you could do, that it wasn't until being offered an opportunity to work on a film like this that I felt like, oh, at last, I can work on something that matters, that will just tell a story that could affect and lessen the suffering of people out there in the world.
Yeah, I mean, and the sentiment you just shared about where did trying to figure out to do the backstory and trace. That's one of the first things we hear in the narration by William in the film. That question. I wanted to, because you just Xander just mentioned that feeling that we all have had. Well, those of us who have not experienced homelessness, of walking past someone and you just you don't want to ignore them, but also there's that, I mean, horrible human reaction that we all get of just keep going. The film is filled with incredible people who are profound. Some of them have been through this, and I'm speaking to you from New York, and my favorite was James Macklin, who works for the Bowery.
Yeah.
And has experienced it himself, and he talks about being on the A train one night at 2:30 in the morning, and some stranger, a woman, came over and just gave him something and said, you don't need to be here, you and he then shares part of his story in a way that is just, I mean, it almost sounds like a great playwright wrote his lines, because he's very profound. Julia, can you talk about finding the voices? Now, he is one of dozens of people that we hear from, but over the course of this bus tour, which I guess was it 3 weeks,
Yeah,
and just gathering the people you were going to put in the film.
Well, we interviewed way more people
Yeah.
than you actually see in the film, and we it was very hard deciding like who is going to end up in it, because there were so many great stories, and listen, we have enough material to make a couple of sequels, and maybe no, I know, Robert's possibly thinking of doing that. But I think that for the interviews that finally ended up in the film, we wanted to show like the spectrum of the different types of individuals that ended up on the streets. Because one thing that struck me, and one of the reasons why I wanted to make this, is that there's a general perception that everybody on the streets are kind of drug addicts or have mental issues. And that is just not true. There are a lot of regular people on the streets who, just through bad circumstances, not being able to keep up with the rent, have ended up there. For example, I met this one couple who were newly out on the streets, and they'd only been there for a week, and they seemed like a nice kind of bright middle class couple. And I said, why are you guys? What happened? Can't you get into a shelter? Why are you in a tent under the bridge? And they said to me, the problem we'd love to be in a shelter, but we have 2 dogs and we can't find a shelter that will take our dogs. And the woman had tears in her eyes and she started crying. And she was like, I just can't bear to have my dog put down. I'd rather sleep here in a tent under the bridge and keep my beloved dogs with us than go to a shelter. And it nearly makes me cry now. I was crying when I heard that story. And then there are others that are just, getting out of prison and then not being able to get a job. That's another reason why a lot of people end up on the streets. There's a lot of foster youth who, when they transition out of the system, they don't have the life skills yet to hold down a job, so they fall through the cracks and end up on the streets. And some of their stories of these 18-year-old kids, we have there's one in the film, just heartbreaking. And a big thing that struck me was when in talking to all the different people I talked to, that was what James Macklin said: you should never look down on someone unless you're reaching down to give them a hand up. Because there's a lot of shame involved in being homeless. And when a lot of regular people who just through bad circumstances have ended up there, there's often a lot of shame to go and ask for help. And suddenly when you're on the streets, everyone's turning away like you have leprosy. And there was a woman that I met at a shelter, when I kind of hugged her, she started crying. And she said, you're the first person who's treated me as a human being and has actually seen me for a long time. Thank you. And I think it's very important that we remember that these are human beings out on our streets, right? Most of them didn't, get there by choice. Even when people have drug issues, when people get drug addiction, they usually got that addiction because they're trying to medicate some type of pain, and then it gets out of control, and they needed to be lifted up, put in, given the tools of recovery and helped.
Yeah, right. And, that's a thread that runs all through the whole film about, the causes, mental health, domestic violence, which probably is connected to mental health, addiction. It all goes back to that. You mentioned what happened in the 80s with under Reagan. William mentioned Biden before, but I don't think of this as an ideological or a political film. I mean, I don't even read it at all that way. And William, I was wondering if you could talk about, it's not in the movie, but I've heard you describe going to Spokane within the last couple of years and having a meeting with the Washington Policy Center, I think, which is,
Yeah.
You maybe would think that for you, it could be a hostile environment, but it wasn't. Can you tell us about that?
I went with Dr. Marbut. It was very interesting. There were 800 people there. They were thrilled to see the left and the right sitting down, talking civilly, finding common ground, finding consensus. Not hard to do on an issue like homelessness, but it's easier to do today than before COVID and before fentanyl. It was much more challenging to get consensus on both sides. Now you have people, I used to have this conversation with people on the Hill 30 years ago when I would try to get increased funding for the National Endowment. When you would talk about the creative, cultural, artistic side, one side would agree and the other side would say federal government should not be in that business. And then when you talk about the economic equation of how when you spend $25,000 or $50,000 on a grant to promote art in Cincinnati or Omaha or Santa Fe, how that triggered $2.50 to $4 of economic activity, and it was a little economic engine that would stimulate the local economy. Then you had an argument you could present to the other side of the aisle. That's what's happening now. When I was there, we were talking, and I was very, very clear. Remember, I just want to rearticulate. This isn't a homelessness crisis as much as it's a mental health crisis. A major component of it is the drug addiction. These people don't have health care. They can't get to a doctor. They can't get to a psychiatrist. They can't get prescribed medication for anxiety, depression, bipolar, PTSD, schizophrenia. So they're self-medicating on the streets with fentanyl to make the pain go away. And when you talk to people about the compassionate component of something has to be done about 1.5 million children on the streets homeless, there's another side of the equation, and that's the economic side of the equation. What is happening to commerce? What is happening to small businesses? What is happening to tourism? What is happening to property values? How is it impacting businesses? When I was in Seattle, I was in front of the famous wharf.
Yeah.
And right across the street was the original Starbucks. And right on the other side of the street was like the Nike store. And there was somebody there that was overdosing on the street. A young gentleman, 21, 22 years old. His name was Blessing. He was overdosing of fentanyl. They called 911. The fire department showed up in a rig. 4 firemen, 2 sheriffs, 2 local police, 2 paramedics in an ambulance, some nonprofits that were in the area, and some faith-based organization people. Like literally 20 people responded to this call. And this is a controversial thing to say, but in Washington, Robert Marbut was critical of the right's position of this, and I was critical of the left's position on this.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the stuff that the left has done is very, very well-intended and very compassionate, but housing first and housing only, housing first is not the answer. These people, you can't put someone in a home, take them off the street and put them in a home if they're mentally ill and expect them to be able to stand on their own 2 feet, okay? I have had to do conservatorships before for family members and for other friends and family. And when you define what a conservatorship is, they say, is the person a threat to themselves or others? Is the person a harm to themselves or others? If they are, you can hold them to try to treat them for a couple of days, have them come down, detox, get sober, and get them some medication. Clearly, this person that was overdosing on the street was a threat to himself and others, and he was a harm to him, certainly a harm to himself, not a harm to others yet, but he was flatlined, and they gave him Narcan, and they brought him back to life. He vomited on the sidewalk, and he turned to the fire department and said, "Go away, leave me alone, don't touch me, I don't want the help," when they had just saved his life. And this is where the well-intended, let's protect the civil liberties of these people. I'm not sure it should be left to a judge and a lawyer in a courtroom 3 months after he's overdosed 10 times and he's flatlined 5 times. I think that we should consider giving first responders, firemen, paramedics, people who are getting their hands dirty on the street every day. They're far more of an expert than any lawyer in a courtroom, not on civil liberties, but on is somebody a harm to themselves or others, or are they a threat to themselves or others? And if this person just flatlined and they brought them back to life with Narcan, and you put them in a facility and have them get more clear-headed over the course, whatever, a 72-hour lockdown, they get more clear-headed so they can make a more sober decision to decide to go back out on the street or get help. I think that that's something that we should look at rather than leaving it in the court system alone. I was standing right there. If a nonprofit person and a paramedic and a cop and a fireman all agreed, if we leave him here, he's going to die. We have to get this person help. And they decided 3, 4, 5 days later, when they were more clear-headed, I don't want your help. I could live with that. But when they were literally revived on the street in front of me, for them to wave off the help, I don't know. It's something we need to have a conversation about.
I think you made the analogy. If you were to save somebody from jumping off of a bridge, and then once you had them saved, say, well, just go back to work now. Just go on with your life. It's like there needs to be, as you point out, more than just the saving.
That's exactly right. It's a slightly different situation, but when the
Yes.
police go to a jumper on the bridge and they talk them down, that person is not released. And there's a difference between that and somebody that's overdosed on fentanyl. But I have watched in San Francisco, Spokane, Seattle, and Sacramento, I have watched 10 people overdosed and revived with Narcan, and 3 or 4 people not revived that died. And many of the people that were revived by the paramedics just 2, 3, 4 months ago, who survived, may not be alive today. I don't know. I don't have the data on that. I can tell you right now, there was one gentleman, and I don't know what it costs to have a rig, the fire department, the sheriff's department, the police department, paramedics, have them all respond to a call. But there was a gentleman, they said in Spokane, they said 60% of their calls are homeless and fentanyl related. And they had one person that they were called on 6 times in one day.
Whoa.
That's an enormous cost to the taxpayer. Again, along with property values, commerce, small business, property values, the ranking of your children's elementary school because of the impact that homelessness and drug addiction, and again, I could add to the list, emergency rooms, being admitted to the hospital, going into the court system, being incarcerated. People don't understand that what they're paying right now, we're not doing enough. And people say, where is the money going to come from if we have this comprehensive 360 wraparound care? It's costing you more right now to not do it. Trust me.
Yeah.
Hospitals and prisons and the property values and the impact on the economy is costing you more now.
Yeah. Yeah. There's actually some real compelling data in the film about costs, even beyond what you're talking about, just what it costs to clean up in San Francisco. A homeless encampment is, I think, $250,000 a day, which, we don't want to see those people suffering, but that could also be used in a wiser way. Xander, I wanted to ask, you, with all the sort of political turmoil and theatrics, you had just addressed the fact that the most frustrating thing is one side wanting to make the other side look bad on these issues. Do you think, though, that somehow we are getting past that, kind of jumping off of what William was just talking about? Do you feel, maybe because of your involvement in this project, that there's some transcendence?
Well, there has been among us,
Yeah.
those of us working on the film that represent different factions of the political spectrum. And so that gives us personal hope. I can only hope that the country gets itself back together in general ways to work together towards solving problems. It's not a political issue. I can't help but feel, just as Billy's stressing the drug addiction and the fentanyl crises aspect of it, Julia having mentioned how many people are not just strictly mental health or drug addiction statistics that are on the streets, and this precipitous migration of wealth from the the loss of our middle class in a lot of ways financially since about 1970 9 on. There's been just like an incredible decrease in the numbers of affluent middle class American citizens, and the 0.001% has amassed just an obscene amount of wealth relative to the rest of the country. And I don't think that's something that can be left out of the equation. There are a lot of people that are losing their homes because they're working 3 jobs and they can't make ends meet. And then one medical bill or one family crisis or whatever it is, and boom, they're out. And I think we have to not depersonalize it to the level of, well, at least there's a little mental health seriously, and at least I don't have a drug addiction seriously. People find ways to distance themselves and make the others an other, and and a statistic rather than an encroaching problem. That the trickle down does not seem to have worked in terms of our economy, and that's not just the right as a policy. It's both of them working together, and all the powerful lobbyists and all the rest of it, making everybody sort of turn a blind eye collectively.
Yeah.
We know, having lived in California, we know that there are people, I know I've talked to people on the street, and they did. There are a lot of places that handed out one-way bus tickets to people because it was like the Greyhound deportation. Billy, what was the expression? I know that there was a term.
Greyhound diplomacy. Greyhound diplomacy.
Yeah, Greyhound diplomacy. It's like, hey, it gets cold here. I'm being compassionate. Consider giving this individual a ticket to a place that's warmer. And if it makes California look bad, hey, that's not bad either. And so there's been a deliberate cynicism on a lot of people's front on that level. And I think that, I think we're all concerned about what's happening in the government with the amount of wealth that's amassed at the top, and how little of it has gone down, and the reluctance by corporations to pay more than a minimum wage that's a livable wage. Come on. It's like, we can all scream and cry about how inflation has impacted things, but I think we also have to look at the fact that there was a supply chain reality that kept gas prices down because nobody was going anywhere during the pandemic. But ships at sea and everything else were blocked, and there was a block on supply chain. So supply and demand, basic principles of supply and demand, made prices rise because the demand was high and the supply was low. And then I think there's a lot of corporate cynicism involved in, well, prices are high now, and the supply is in. Why should we lower our prices? We'd only be cutting our profit. Our stock owners would be happy if we never lowered these prices again, no matter what the impact is on the individual on the street.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. And I think, we all know that, like Billy was saying, at any given moment, I think any sane, rational person is able to adopt the argument of the other side, see the flaws in their own side, whatever bubble they float around in. But I think the more we penetrate those seemingly impenetrable bubble fields and really communicate with each other and say, well, no, okay. Granted, this is true on the left, has been ridiculous in some ways with the wanting to just give all these personal freedoms, and they finally changed that certain laws back, like about not having any legal consequence for theft below a certain amount of money. These laws are changing back because they just don't make sense, and they lead to mayhem, and giving people housing and spending all that money but not addressing the problem is just foolish, and feeling like that we have the right to give these individuals the freedom to take huge sums of money and cause huge, social engines to have to move every time they OD. That's as absurd to me as the cynicism and the greed on other sides that don't want to spend the money because they don't care enough about human beings and a civilized society.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I completely agree. It's important, and the film gets into this. And Julia, as we finish up, I wanted to have you talk. I felt like crying sometimes because I was so sad, but then I also felt like crying sometimes because I was really uplifted. And the movie has a certain journey. There's an arc we go on. We even go to places like in San Antonio where things are working. That part of all of these years and all of this effort is starting to pay off. Was it important for you in structuring the movie, in getting all that you were able to acquire over these weeks on the bus, and then to present a a 95 or 100-minute movie that will leave audiences at the end in a state other than just pure despair for the future?
Thank you so much for noticing that, Joe. Yes, that's very important to me, and it's a theme that is very much been in pretty much every film that I've made, because for me as a filmmaker, of being passionate about raising awareness on these social issues, I feel like it's very important to leave people with hope and to also show the possible solutions that could be implemented, because I think there is hope. I'm the perennial optimist. I believe in the good of people and the good in the world. And I love that you also noticed that this film was non-political, because this is a crisis that isn't about politics. It's about us coming together as a society and saying, right, we have this problem. Billy's very right in pointing out about this is a mental health crisis, but it's also a crisis of broken hearts, of people who, for various reasons, and many of whom don't deserve to be on the streets, have ended up there. And we as a society need to come together and find solutions. And solutions, when everybody comes together, are always possible. And we see, when we were on this making this documentary, we saw the success that a lot of the nonprofit sector was having, and the rate of people that they were getting back into society through having these 360 wraparound service programs. And I'm a great believer in second chances. In the documentary, you see, I think it was in Westchester, this young man who looks like he just stepped out of a J. Crew ad, who takes us around the facility and is talking to us about how it all works. I asked that young man how he got there and how he ended up working for this group. He told me that 5 years ago, he was a crack addict on the streets, and somebody gave him a chance and took him to this facility, and he got back on his feet. And now he is there, for 5 years, been there helping others. A lot of the people running these programs are all former addicts who've been given that helping hand. Look at James Macklin. What a wonderful man. And look what he's done and how many lives he's touched and made a difference to, right? So there is hope. There's a huge amount of hope. I truly believe this. And my goal with this film was to really spark this conversation and debate, and just to show some of the things that are working out there that could be, got behind, because as many others on this panel have pointed out, giving a drug addict keys to an apartment doesn't work. We heard from people that these apartments are turning into drug dens, or they're finding that person 10 days later dead of an overdose. That's not fair either to the community or the residents that live there to have that going on.
Yeah.
I know we
This
have
harm
to wrap
reduction.
up. I just said we're close to closing now, ending. I just said one more thing I wanted to say before we go. Is that
Yeah, of
possible?
course. Of course. Yeah, for
I
sure.
know people are probably wondering what they can do.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, I
and
was going to ask you.
I would say, just like you do every election cycle, you register, you volunteer, you donate, you vote. Register, volunteer, donate, vote. Here, you do the same thing. Get online, find out who's doing the best work in your community, and go there and volunteer and donate your time, or write a check for 10, 20, 25, $50 will have a huge impact. Another thing you can do is, I hear repeatedly, and Julia mentioned it before, that these people are just desperate to be seen and desperate to be heard. I was just in a facility in Seattle or something. I'm not sure what city I was in. And this person said, I was the first person to sit down with them and take them by the hand and look in their eyes and talk to them and hear them. They felt heard and they were crying when they were saying this. I'm not saying you need to go that far, because clearly on the streets it could be drug addiction and mental health issues. It can become potentially dangerous, but to walk around somebody, to go to the other side of the street, to step over them, to pretend you're on your cell phone, as opposed to walking by and looking at them and looking them in the eye and smiling and saying, "I hope you have a nice day," or "Good morning."
There's a two word thing that's in the film that to me sums the whole thing up, and how it's not only a way to help solve the problem, but to also there's a almost a selfish element in it, that you can benefit yourself and get out of whatever funk you might be in. Those two words that guy says, help somebody. The guy was in treatment, and the woman that woke them all up at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, got him out of bed, said, help somebody today, help somebody. And it was like this shock, and you could see how much it had transformed him. It was night and day transformation in his life, just by that little secret. And that's what you're both talking about. We all got it for our own sake, as well as for everyone else's. Help somebody.
And just smile.
Just smiling.
If that's all you do, just giving a smile, giving like a little smile of hope.
Make eye contact and say good morning, or say hello, or say, how you doing? It's like they're so used to being ignored or stepped over or trampled on. If you could provide a homeless person 5 things: education, healthcare, job, livable wage, affordable housing, they're no longer homeless. They're a member of the middle class in America, okay? Education, healthcare, job, livable wage, affordable housing. Tough to do for people that are homeless, tough to do for many people right now.
Yeah.
What's going on with the economy and what's going on in the world. So look them in the eye, smile, say good morning, means the world.
And I think that's the power of a movie like this, is that, especially in our major cities, that people will walk out of their home, out of their apartment, and see the world around them a little differently, as an effect of this movie. And I think that's actually something that we mentioned. James Macklin, we keep going back to him. He's works at the Bowery. He says that if you're walking around on the street and just step over someone who's there, he said, you may be walking around, but you're not really alive in this world. And so I would love to finish that way. Thank the 3 of you so much for this real enlightening, engaging conversation.
And Robert Craig, who put up all the money for this.
Robert Craig.
His name ought to be thrown in there too. And Julia, thank you so much for just having started the whole ball rolling in this direction.
Let me just also mention to our the people who've been watching, thank you all for joining us, and be the first to know about upcoming screenings and events. Get content and premium membership by becoming a TheWrap Pro member, and you can join now to take advantage of a free trial. For all screening information, including past screenings you may have missed, visit TheWrap.com and go to the events tab. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.